is basically a quarter of a daf. And we pick up, we're in the middle of discussing the Psukim of Malchus, Zichronos, and Shofros. And we pick up with, we had a debate of whether a Pikto note were like Zichronot or not, and the idea of mentioning something only about an individual, not about a tzibur, difference between things about Jews versus non-Jews. Okay, and now the Gemara is like this. It is about exactly across the line on the top of Rabbeinu Hananel in the right-hand margin. The line starts with the word Damya, and then there's a pasuk. Okay, so it's about 10 lines down in the medium-sized. Yeah, exactly, 10 lines down in the medium-sized line. Okay, so there you got Melech. Mizeh Melech HaKavod, Hashem uses Gibor, so that's Melech twice. Hashem Gibor Melchamasu, Shem Hashem Musip Yisrael Yavo Melech HaKavod, that's Melech 3 times. Mizeh Melech HaKavod, that's 4 times. Hashem Tzakot to Melech HaKavod Tzela 5 times. Okay, well, since anyway, you only need 3 from Ketuvim, but that already gets you 5. So let's take a look. Rishona Shtayim Shniya Shalosh, Shriv Reb Yossi. Reb Yossi said, like we assumed, the first pasuk is 2. Susha Moshe Yavo Melech HaKavod Miyuza Melech HaKavod, and then the next pasuk Susha Moshe Chamuzu Pischalam Yavo Melech Miyuza Melech Hashem Tzatuku Melech is 3. So you could use one pasuk to get you 2. You could use the second pasuk to get you 3. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Yishona Achas Shniyah Shtayim. No, the first one only counts for 1, and the second only for 2, because within the psukim are questions. Mi hu zeh melech hakavod, mi zeh melech hakavod. So it's not yet identifying, although you could say it's rhetorical, but it's not yet identifying God as melech. So the question mi zeh melech hakavod does not count as one of the malchus. Okay, moving on. Now, what is interesting is that you could have one pasuk that counts as more than once. That if you have multiple mentions in a pasuk, it could count for 2, even though so it's not just X number of psukim. It's really X number of mentions within the psukim. Okay, Zimru Elokim Zameru, Zimru Malkenu Zameru, Ki Melech Kol Haaretz Elokim Shtayim. So again, Malkenu and Melech Kol Haaretz. Di Reb Yossi. Reb Yehuda Omer Achas, 1. Now why only 1? Because Rashi says Malkenu is only our God, and the idea here is Melech Al Kol Haaretz. So therefore it doesn't count. So interestingly, although you could focus on Yisrael when it comes to the issue about, bad things, and if it's a bad zichronot for the non-Jews, you can say it and so on, when it comes to the issue of Malchus, that has to be universal. Or at least according to Rabbi Yehuda. The Shavim, they agree, Malach Elohim al Goyim, Elohim Yashav al Kisei Kadsho, Shi Achat. That's only once. First of all, it's al Goyim, so it's the whole world. And number 2, sitting on the throne, although it evokes the idea of kingship, is not actually the language of Melech. So that only counts as 1. Zikaron sheyesh bo truah tigon. If it's a zikaron mentioned together with truah, like the pasuk of Shabson zichron truah mikra kodesh. Omer im hazichronot v'omer im hashofrot. You can double purpose it. You can repeat that pasuk and you have it once to count for zichron and then again to count for a truah. Di Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda consistently seems to have narrower definitions here than Rabbi Yossi. Eina omer elim hazichronot bilvad. You only say it by the zichronot. Now why? So you could say, why not say it only in the truah? So say you get to choose one, but you can't do it twice. So Rashi says the reason is because the word truah is not the word of shofar. And as we know, true even applies by chatzotrot. So therefore, he discounts that as counting for shofar. It can only count for zichronot. Malchus Jeshimo Trua. How about a similar case by Malchus? You go on Hashem Elokav Imo Truas Melech Bo. Omer Ima Malchios Va'omi Mashofros. Again, Rabbi Yossi says you could use twice. Di Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eina Omer Elima Malchios Bavad. Only Malchios. Again, Rashi says for the same reason, because Trua here does not explicitly say shofar, and that actually we see now explicitly discussed in this third case. Trua she'eni mavlo klum, the word trua by itself, you go yom trua yelachem, okay, which is a pretty relevant pasuk. Om yuna shofroti Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer ein omer kolikar. You can't even say the very pasuk that it says by by Rosh Hashanah, Zichro Trua, Yom Trua, can't count for truas because it does for shofars because it doesn't say shofar. Okay, so quite interesting. It has to specifically emphasize the shofar aspect of it, not the trua, which does raise an interesting question. Since the Torah characterizes it as a Yom Trua and a Zichron Trua, right? Even though we learn out from Yom Kippur the idea of shofar, why didn't we have the third bracha be truot? Why is the third bracha shofarot? Right? So it is interesting. Maybe dafka to underscore that no, Chazal are telling it's a shofar, and we need to focus on that. Maybe because there's a lot of other psukim about shofar that we want to specifically evoke. There's also an interesting question of the difference between tki'ah and shofar and tru'ah. The Ramban we'll discuss the way you do the mitzvah later, but the Ramban discusses from a Kabbalistic idea that like tki'ah is midas harachamim and tru'ah is midas hadin. Like tru'ah is like the staccato. It's like more some of like I don't know, like being hit or something. It's not as victorious as the tki'ah. If you look in the psukim by the halotcha, right, or it's more like wailing and crying out, which we know is the language of tru'ah. If you look in Bahalotcha, where it discusses the chatzotzrot and how they're used differently.
The shvarim is like a wail.
Yeah, but shvarim and tru'ah are like the same, because it's just a question of how to interpret tru'ah. So, on the one hand, so the tkiyah is used to gather the camps, right, and tru'ah is used to move them forward. So I'm not sure if that exactly maps, but anyway, it says. So when there's a war tru'ah, and simcha is a tkiyah. So that clearly seems to indicate the difference there. So it could be that even though it's a Yom Tru'ah, which according to this idea is like a Yom Hadin and so on, maybe we didn't want to overemphasize the Tru'ah aspect, right, because of that more negative connotation. So therefore the emphasis of it as a shofarot and not as a truot. And also again, shofarot allows you to quote psukim by Har Sinai, gives you a wider range of psukim to be quoting. Okay. Im hishlim matchil b'torah umashlim b'navid v'yos yomein hishlim b'torah yatsa. So the Gemara says, "Im hishlim di'evedim lechatchila lo." What do you mean? It sounds like if you finished with Torah, only b'di'eved. V'atani Rabbi Yossi Omer hamashlim b'Torah havei zeh mushubach. You should end with Torah. Ema mashlim. So fine, change the text. It should say im hishlim. It should say and you should be mashlim. Of course, it's pretty forced because also the word yatsa, which means b'di'eved. So the Gemara says, "Im hishlim tani." You can't do that. It says if you finished. Di'eved. So the Gemara, di'evedim lechatchila lo. Hachikam. You start with Torah and you end with Navi. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Mashlim b'Torah. You should be Mashlim b'Torah. The im hishlim b'Navi yatsa. So we alter the text to have Rabbi Yossi saying b'di'eved if it's Navi or Yotze, but you should end with Torah, and that's what we do. We have 3 of each, and then we end with the 10th pasuk of Torah. Tani nam yachim yutat. Similarly, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi, Vatikin hayu mashlimim motor b'Torah. The ancient ones, like an ancient tradition, or the particularly firm ones, would end with a pasuk in the Torah. Now we're going to see if we have enough psukim for them. So zichronot v'shofarot ikatuva. There's plenty of psukim by zichronot and shofarot, even in the Torah. Elamalchios, but if we're now going to have 3 of Torah, 3 of Ksuvim, 3 of Nevi'im, and end with Torah, we're going to need 4 psukim of Torah from each category. So Malchios, plus Udahavi, and there's only 3 Malchios. What are the 3 Malchios in the Torah? Hashem Elokav Yimo, which was Melech Bo, V'hi Bishur Melech, and Hashem Yimloch Le'olam Ba'ed. And if you're going to need to be Mashlim B'Torah, you're going to need a 4th pasuk of Malchios. Vanan Be'ina and Eser, V'leka, we're going to need 10, which will be wrapped up by Malchios. So by Torah. Amar Rafuna Tashma, coming here, we have a brisa. Shema Yisrael, Tashma, Shema Yisrael, and Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Malchus. Divrei Rabbi Yossi. That counts as Malchus because it's God as king and as singular king, presumably over the whole world. Not king, God, but the singular God over the world evokes an idea of Malchus. Again, interesting because until now we've been very exacting and demanding in the exact term. Even God sitting on the throne isn't a Malchus.
Is this the primary location in Shas of that association?
Of that as Malchus?
Yeah. Shema is
associated with Malchus. Yeah. This isn't about Kriyas Shema. It's just using this pasuk about Malchus.
Right, but it's such a foundational association.
Yeah, it's true. Shema. Right, that it's about. You mean Kabbalah's Malchus Shemayim?
Exactly.
Yeah, Kabbalah's that's a good point. Malchus Shemayim is a phrase that's used in other contexts about Shema. So you're right. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. The association with it of Malchus Shemayim is Malchus.
There's no overt mention of Malchus.
Right, that is a good point. That is a good point. The Malchus Shemayim is that theme of Malchus. That's a good point. Yep. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ein Malchus. Now we know Rabbi Yehuda is more restrictive, so he's not prepared to count this as Malchus. Okay, now but we're a little stuck. We need a 4th. So again, God is the only God, Malchus. Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eino Malchus. It's not Malchus. Atar Reis Daski Hashem Elokim Eino Milvado. Oh, the only God is God. Malchus. Do Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eino Malchus, which is like, okay, so what do you do for Rabbi Yehuda? So it doesn't exactly tell us. By the way, it raises an interesting question of what the point of Malchus is. Is the point of Malchus basically like there are no other gods? God is the singular God, and maybe, in the sense also of evoking of creation. God created the world. God is all powerful. So then you get it from those psukim. If Malchus also suggests an idea of din, king is sort of power over, sort of over his subjects, then some of these psukim, like Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, don't exactly evoke that same sense. Mm-hmm. So I think there's also a question here about what is, about what the idea of Malchus is. So anyway, if you want to look at what we actually do, right? So because we incorporate Malchus with Kiddushat Hayom, as we've been saying, so we start with Ata v'chartanu, and then we say, Mikra Kodesh Yelachem, right? That's actually Musaf. Because it's Musaf, we're also going to have we're going to have, if the Kiddushat Hayom is also going to have the korbanot of Musaf. So we have Neichat Te'enu v'chodesh hashvi'i, and then we do Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol, right? And the Aleinu used to only be in the Musaf Shmona Esrei here, got extracted, right? And then it goes, right? V'anachnu kol mishachim niftei melech malchei hamlachim. So Aleinu introduces Malchus, right? Which is one of the psukim we just quoted here. That's the end of the first pasuk, but it doesn't yet say melech. Al keinikav, etc. Okay. Where was it? So that's one that everybody can agree on. So those are the three we know of, plus the Hashem Hu Elokim, which was debated. Okay, so in the end we obviously get back to the Shema Yisrael. Okay. By the way, I should also say, because we're going to be discussing the limud from Chatzotzrot, when we get to Shofarot, right? What are the ones we say by Shofarot? So we start with Atani Gleisavan An Chodecha, evoking Har Sinai, right? And then there's a lot of Shofarot about Har Sinai. Kol Shofar Chazak Me'od. Kol Shofar Olek V'Chazek Me'od. Kol Amrim Zakolos V'Salatinas Kol HaShofar. Then you do Recha, etc. So since Chatzotzrot serve as a basis for some of the ideas, even though it's a Chatzotzrot, we quote that at the end of Shofarot. Okay? So it's quite interesting that we have, as the last of the Shofarot, we have the pasuk of the Chatzotzrot. So, right? So that's pretty fascinating, right? That's a pasuk that actually is, it's Katem Chatzotzrot al Leisichem Yulachem Zikarot. So that is, the Gemara doesn't point that out, but we don't only do something a little bit questionable in terms of the last pasuk by the what do you call it, by the Malchus, we do it by the Shofarot as well. We get to this other pasuk of Yom Simchaschem. Okay, so let's take a look now at the Mishnah. Somebody is now the person who passes in front of the ark, meaning the one who is the leading of the Shmona Esrei, the Baal Shachris, the Baal Tfilah, the Shliach Tzibor. Hasheni.
Is there a difference between an over lifnei teva and yored?
Yeah, so I'll say something about that in a minute. Hasheni matkiya. So the second one is the Baal Tokeya, which basically indicates that you do the Tekiyot during Musaf. Ubishad Hallel, at a time when there's Hallel, not a Rosh Hashanah, we don't say Hallel, but when you do say Hallel, Harishon Makare, et Hallel. Okay, whatever. Makre.
Makre, yeah.
Okay. The first one is the one that reads the Hallel, recites the Hallel, because you say Hallel with Shacharit, as we know we do. The Baal Shacharit, Chazar Sashatz flows right into Hallel. Okay, so here we have it, and here we have that the Kiyah is in Musaf, and the question is going to be why. In terms of the difference Ha'over as opposed to Hayored, I've read some articles on that. It has to do with, I'm trying to remember what it has to do with, where the Aron was, and whether the Aron was like elevated, and I don't know. It has to do with some changing. Yeah. But some changing. That idea that you would, I think, read from a actual depression in the ground, I don't think is evidenced in the in the synagogues that they've uncovered from the turn of the millennia period, from the Tannaitic period. I think part of the difference has to be whether there was an Aron and when the Aron was brought in and where the Aron was situated, whether it's called Yored Lifnei HaTeva or Over Lifnei HaTeva. There's an article that I read that I just don't remember the particulars about that.
This Mishnah kind of implies that they recite Hallel in Rosh Hashanah?
No, that's why it says U Bishat HaHallel, meaning at a time when you will be saying Hallel, not now. Okay. Otherwise, it would have said Harishon Makriyat HaHallel, Vasheni does the Tkiyah, but there is no Hallel now. Okay.
I do have a question about Hallel. We talk about Kriyat Shema because they read it from the cloth. It's always Kriyat Hallel. Why is that the verb?
Well, I mean, it is reading Psukim.
I thought that the Tefillot were recited by heart, basically.
You mean, does it have a sense that it's being read from a cloth?
It's always the verb.
I don't know.
We grow at the Hallel.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. It's a good question. Okay, Ma'ishna Sheni Matkiya. Why do you do it at Musaf? You want everybody to be in shul by then. Okay, which is it's always fascinating whether the shul decides to first have the tkiyot and then do the rabbi's speech, or first do the rabbi's speech and then have the tkiyot. Which is one they really want to make sure everybody is there for. Okay, anyway, Yehachi says that's true. Halal nami nema b'sheni mishum derova madras melech. So, in any time we have like a special thing for that day, like Hallel, and especially if it's about the type of a communal tefillah or communal praise, whatever it is, let's do that at Musaf too. We'll get everybody there. Elamashna halal debrishon. Why do you do it during Shachris? Mishum disrizim makdim lemitzvos. You'd rather do it earlier. So you do mitzvahs earlier rather than later. So tkiya nami navid berishon mishum disrizim makdim lemitzvos. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan b'shas gzeres hamalchus shanu. Yeah, you're right. This was taught when there was a edict from the government. What does that mean? So Rashi says that it was forbidden in order to blow the shofar. So we had to wait till the government spies left, and we did it, and therefore we had to do it later. They got tired, and they spent 2 hours, nothing was happening yet. After Hashanah 4 hours, nothing was happening. Finally, they left. So we did the tekiyos. Tosfos gives a Yerushalmi that says even a better explanation about that. If you take a look, b'shas gzeres hamalchus shanu, says Tosfos, v'afal pi shabat l'gzeres malchus. First of all, why don't you say, well, nowadays there's no gzeres malchus. Let's move it back to Shachris. He says, Lo of dinan kimei kara. We don't go back. Afagav dezuzim makim lemitzvos. Techachinam shem yachzu davar l'kukulo. We maybe things will get bad again, and we'll keep it where it is. Okay. L'persha yushami nichat fei. The mefarei sham shedimu ha'oivim. It wasn't just some edict not to blow the shofar. The enemies of the Jews misinterpreted. They thought they saw everybody was gathering and they were blowing the shofar. Truas milchama. So what do? You blow a shofar as a way of like calling people to gather and go to war. The Amdu Aleim B'Hargum, and it led to them fighting against them and killing them. Ulakach tiknut kiyot ubrachot b'musaf tichichazu to kar b'kriyas shema umispalin v'kar b'torah v'chavin umispalin v'tokin. So they do all this shul stuff first. Amri b'ni musayu inu naskina. They're just doing their rituals. B'chukosam u'v'torasam, and therefore we don't. Obviously, they understand it properly. Now, all these are very secondary reasons. The Yerushalmi gives also a more intrinsic reason, and it quotes it. I think it ties it into the fact that in the Psukim, they're connected to the Korban Musaf, the Truah, where it says, Yom Truah, Zichron Truah, appears in the context of the Musafim, and it does raise, the idea that if Musaf is about like the identity of the day, it's about the Korban that's unique to the day and the identity of the day. You want to do the Tkiyot during that, period. That's also about the Tkiyot are not just a mitzvah that happens to fall today, but it's about the identity. Yom Truah Yelachem, and therefore you want to do it, at the time of the Musaf. So the Yerushalmi gives a more intrinsic reason to this, but Rovam Hadras Melech works as well, and that certainly is true. Okay, so
in other words, your enemies are all armed and waiting to attack you. No, they're not.
Exactly. All right. Next Mishnah. Well, no, Joseph didn't say they're trying to find an excuse. He thought they really misinterpreted it. Okay. I'm sorry, not next Mishnah, Gemara. Okay. Nidikamer b'shas ha'halel miklad b'Rosh Hashanah leka halel. Because it says when you would say halel, it's clear that you don't say it on Rosh Hashanah. My taima. Amar Rabbi Yavo, Amar Malach Elishos from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The heavenly angel said to God, Yibona Shalom, Mitnei Ma'ayin Yisrael Omim Shira Lefanecha Rosh Hashanah B'Yom Kippur. Why are they not singing your songs Amalahem, he said to them, Efshar Melch Yoshev, he say, Din, V'sifrechai, V'sifremesim, Psuchim, Afanav, Yisrael, Mimshira. Would it be appropriate when their whole lives are hanging in the balance that they should be praising me? It's not a day, it's a day of awe, it's not a day of simcha. Which does raise interesting questions in general about attitudes towards Rosh Hashanah, and to what degree is simcha appropriate for Rosh Hashanah. There's a whole question, are you allowed to fast on Rosh Hashanah? So, some poskim said yes. Even though normally you can't fast on Yom Tov because of Simcha, as a Yom HaDin, you are allowed to fast. And you see here that the idea of awe and din weighs out over against Simcha just by the fact that you don't say Hallel. Others said you're not allowed to fast, and they actually quoted another Midrash, and the Midrash says the angels say to God, God, why is it that, or I don't know if the angels say to God, but anyway, it says normal person, he comes for din, and he's dressed in black, and he's covered in ashes, but Yisrael, they come, and they're dressed in their nice white clothes, and they're, and in their clean clothes, and in this joyous approach, because they're confident that Kadosh Baruch Hu will find be done them l'zuchus. So there's this sense of awe, but it's combined with also a sense of it's all a question of kibnei maron, like troops standing for inspection, or the sheep walking at this mountain pass. How do you combine those two types of themes? So this other midrash speaks about dafka. It's a type of a din that we have a sense of pride and joy and confidence in. So it raises as interesting questions about which sort of theme dominates. And it says that there's a real question about people who wanted to fast all of Rosh Hashanah. They tell a story that somebody said, I think it was to the Beis Halevi, which was Rabbi Yosef Tov Halevi Salvechik, not the Rav, but the Rav's great grandfather. Anyway, says, you rabbis, you're also machmir. I'm sick of it. He says, what do you mean? He says, I'm a big makil. People say it's usher to fast on Rosh Hashanah. I think it's mutter. I get another couple of examples like that. All right. Anyway, shofar shel Rosh Hashanah ein ma'avin alav es atchum. The shofar for Rosh Hashanah, you cannot, again, it's so funny, Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah, shofar Shel Rosh Hashanah, I mean, what else? Okay, but anyway, shofar Shel Rosh Hashanah, ein ma'avin alav es atchum, even though it's a mitzvah d'oraisa, you cannot carry it beyond the tchum in order to help somebody do the mitzvah, or to bring it into town. Ve'ein mefatchin alav es agal, you can't uncover if it's under a pile of stones. Lo olim be'ilan, you can't go up a tree. V'lo rochvin al gabi behema, you can't ride a behema. By the v'lo shatin al pnei hamayim, you can't swim, put it have a float and go get it from across the river. By the way, you will notice that most of these things, Olim Bilan Rochvin Al Gabi Behema Shatin Al Pnei Hamayim, is a Mishnah we taught earlier in Beitza about the classic list of what is a shavut, what is like a rabbinically type of thing you can't do on Yom Tov. So here it's saying, even though these are rabbinic, you still can't do it for the sake of the mitzvah. You can't cut it, meaning cut the to trim it, cut that, to shorten it. Whether you're doing something that's only a rabbinic prohibition, whether it's a biblical prohibition, we'll see what that would be. If you want to put water or wine in it in order to clean it out, that you can do. There's no prohibition there. You don't prevent the kids from blowing, but you involve yourself with them until they learn. So you can actively participate and get them to blow in order to learn how to blow. Now, what that exactly means, we'll unpack that. If you're just fooling around and you're maybe trying to help them, but you're not trying to do the mitzvah, you don't fulfill your obligation. Gets back to the kavanah too. And if you heard from somebody that was not intending to do the mitzvah, or just sort of, fooling around with it, then you also do not fulfill your obligation. Again, going back to the issue of kavanah. So there's a lot in this Mishnah. It's actually 2 or 3 Mishnayot pasted together. Let's take a look at the Gemara. My taima, why can you not override Yontiv? Shofar aseyu. The Yom Tov asay v'lo tasay, ve'in esay docha lo tasay v'asay. So why you can't biblically do a biblical violation? It's clear. A positive mitzvah doesn't override a positive and a negative. But how about a rabbinic? Lo olim bilan v'lo rochin agabi behema. So the Gemara says, Hashta d'Rabbanan amartalo. So once you say you cannot do the rabbinic, so d'oraisa mibai, of course, what do you mean? Bein mishum shvus, bein mishum lo taseh. If you can't do the d'Rabbanan, certainly you can't do the d'oraisa. All right, zu ein tzarich lomar zuktani. Yeah, fine. This, and it goes without saying that. But again, the Gemara does not seem to need to justify why you cannot violate a d'Rabbanan. Once it justified why you can't violate a d'oraita, it's assuming that a d'Rabbanan goes hand in hand. Right? Once fundamentally shofar doesn't override override Yontiv at the Doraisa level, we're also not going to let it override Yontiv at the Drabanan level. Okay, now, that's not always so obvious. Like, for example, if you think about on Shabbos, what can you do on Shabbos Tzarech mitzvah? So our general approach is, but besides Milah, like just in terms of Durabanans. So since you can't violate Shabbos in general for a mitzvah, but if it's a Shavus to Shavus, a Durabanan of a Durabanan, like then it would be allowed, or a Mira Lagoy for a Durabanan would be allowed. Okay, that's not a single Durabanan. This is a single Durabanan. But like there's the position of the Aruch that says you can even override Shabbat for a single Durabanan in order to do a mitzvah. Yeah, you can override a single Durabanan in order to do a mitzvah on Shabbat. So just because the Yontiv itself is the day itself, the biblical aspects can't be overridden. It doesn't mean there wouldn't be scenarios where the rabbinic aspects can be overridden. Nevertheless, the Gemara doesn't feel a need to justify that. Once we've explained why you can't override Yontiv, you can't override the Durabanans as well, the Shvutim, also in order to do the mitzvah. How that fits into the Aruch's general sort of structure is not clear. But the Gemara doesn't even need to feel it needs to justify that. Yes.
I don't know if you want to go there, but before I moved to Riverdale, I asked several people several questions, and the practice of having the doorman push the button on the elevator was described as a shvus to shvus.
Right.
In a way to work around.
Yes, because that's it's a non-Jew, so that's one Durabanan, and the electricity when it's not involved, like incandescent lights, is generally assumed to be at most a Durabanan. So, but that's other Shabbos questions. But yes, okay, moving on though. So you don't override the Oraisas and somehow also not Durabanans. The Ein Chodchino so Bein B'Davar Shu Mishum Taf of Lam Gimel Amud Aleph. Finally to today's daf. Bein Chodchino so Bein B'Davar Shu Mishum Shvus Bein B'Davar Shu Mishum Lotaseh. So the Gemara says Mishum Shvus, a rabbinic way of trimming the shofar would be magla, a type of a knife that's not the normal knife you would use. I don't know how they translate it there. A sickle. So take a sickle to your shofar is a little unusual, so it's a shinoi. Okay, Mishum Lotaseh, sakina, a normal knife, and then it's the normal way of doing it, and it's a problem of tikkun kli, you're fixing something. So the Gemara says Hashim Mishum Shvus. Once you say you can't do it rabbinic, lotasem ibaya, you have to tell me you can't do a biblical violation. Same point, fine. It goes without saying. Once we said the Rabbanim, we'll mention the Doraisa. But you can put liquid in it to clean it out. In water and wine, yes. Low, not urine. So I don't know. Somehow the fact that they're even thinking about it means that it would have done some type of a good job in terms of cleaning. Maybe it's the what do you call it? The what is it you're going to have? Nitrogen or something? I don't know. Whatever it has. What?
Yeah.
Anyway, whatever it has, they somehow they felt that it would have done a good job, but nevertheless, it's not appropriate. So masnisin mani abasholi, it's abashol at the time, turn bryce abashol, omer mayim o yayin mutar, kadei letzach tzecho, because it cleans it out. Meir gleim asur mitnei hakavod. It's not respectful for a shofar, a mitzvah object, to have put urine through it.
Same with the
the Ketorah. Now we get to this issue about the kids not interfering with their desire to blow the shofar. So the Gemara first says, Hanashim ma'akvin. It would sound like women you prevent, meaning not only are maybe women not obligated, which we've never explicitly said, we sort of implicitly said. We did say it once when we were dealing with Yovel. But anyway, but you wouldn't even let them do it. Now, why should you not let women do it? Even if they're not obligated, and even if you say they get no schar for it, what should be the problem? So if you take a look at Rashi says a pretty extreme thing. Rashi says, the first narrow line, Hanashi ma'akvin, dipturas legamre, the mitzvah say shazman gramihi, v'chitaki ikabal tosif. There's Baal Tosef. Remember, we had a whole Baal Tosef discussion. So that's pretty bizarre that it would be Baal Tosef. First of all, it suggests that women get no credit at all for doing it. And number two, Baal Tosef normally is, I'm doing the mitzvah and I'm expanding it, not somebody who's not obligated is doing. So pretty much all the Rishonim argue on Rashi. Some want to reframe it as it's nirek Baal Tosef. Still, it's inappropriate. You're adopting something that's not relevant to you. You're somehow expanding. It's inappropriate. You're expanding the normal boundaries of the mitzvah. Mostly, though, we should understand that the concern more is the same type of a concern that might apply to the kids as well, which is if the mitzvah isn't relevant to you, then normally a shofar on Sukkot would be muktzah, and blowing it would be a making music on Yantiv, which you're not supposed to do. So it's not really a type of a Bal Tosi problem, but it's a problem that if it's not relevant to you, then there are possible other incidental issues that make it inappropriate, which wouldn't mean that there's always a problem to do a mitzvah that isn't relevant to you, but sometimes there might be if it's, and that gets to the issue that the Gemara is about to quote by Simicha. So let's take a look. Tanya, we taught in the Brisa. So this is one of the very famous Gemaras about this issue of women's relationship to time-bound mitzvot. Even though they're patur, what is their potential relationship to it? But we taught in the Brisa, that you allow women to blow as well if they want to. So Amar Abaye, lo kash. It's not difficult. Ha Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon. It's a debate of Rabbi Yehuda on one side and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon on the other side. The time we taught in the Brisa. B'nei Israel, speak to the children of Israel. B'nei Israel somchim v'ein b'nos Yisrael somchos. And the end of that pasuk is v'samach yado. It's about korbanot. So B'nei Israel do smicha on korbanot, and not b'not Israel. Women don't do smicha on korbanot. Put their hands on it. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon omrim nashim somchos rishos. They're not obligated, but they're allowed to. So this is a debate. Women's relationship to mitzvah sasei shazman grama, is it completely off limits, or are they allowed to if they want? Now, why should there be a problem, even if they're not obligated? So again, Rashi might say Bal Tosif. Other Rishonim say by the korbanot that if his korbanot is kudshim, and by smicha you put your weight on it, you put your hands and you lean on it, that would be inappropriate unless there would be a mitzvah type of of some element of a mitzvah going on there. So this becomes the question of, do we allow, even if there are some incidental secondary problems, do we allow women to do it, but because to do this mitzvah and ignore those secondary problems? Now the question might be, if the answer is yes, we do allow women, right? Halacha. Why? How do you ignore those secondary problems of muktzah or using kudshim and so on? So there's two answers. One answer is Kedei lasos nachas ruach lenashim. I mean, this comes up in another sugya as well, Chagiga, which is, really, it is a problem, but, we want to make women feel more included, so we'll waive some of those rabbinic concerns, okay? So on the one hand, that's nice. It's a statement about inclusion and the values of inclusion overriding some types of concerns. But on the other hand, it doesn't intrinsically say something about women's relationship to the mitzvah. The stronger approach is to say, look, just because they're exempt from the mitzvah doesn't mean they're excluded from the mitzvah. And if they actually do the mitzvah, it's like an Eina Mitzvah Yosef. They get schar. So it's not like it's a problematic. They're actually blowing shofar. They might as well be tooting a trumpet, but it makes them feel good, so we'll let them do it even though there's a muktzah problem. No! If they choose to blow the shofar, they're doing the mitzvah of shofar. It's optional, but they're still doing the mitzvah, and therefore those problems fall away. So that becomes a very central question. And there's a lot of questions wrapped up here. First of all, how do we pass them? Like Rabbi Yehuda or like Rabbi Yossi? Right? Which way? Do women have that allowance or not? So you take a look at Tosos, first line. He says, Omer Rabbeinu Tam, Avagav Distam Asdisin Rabbi Yehuda, although there's a Stam Mishnah Rabbi Yehuda that women don't do smicha, Halach to Rabbi Yossi. How do we know that women do smicha? Number one, Didimuko Imo. Normally we pass him like Rabbi Yossi because we say Rabbi Yossi his reason is with him. That's a general approach that Rabbi Yossi knows what he's talking about. And Umasa Rav, there's a precedent. Now, Masarav normally means a rabbi acted this way, so it wasn't just theoretical, it was actually practiced. Let's see what the precedent is. Motzi tefillin, Michal bas Shaul, haisa maneches tefillin. Michal, the daughter of Shaul, wore tefillin. V'isha shel Yonah, shaisa ola l'regel. And Yonah's wife, famous Gemara with ola l'regel. I love it, that's Masarav. Who was the Rav there? Michal. And Yonah's wife, they were the Rav. But anyway, there actually was precedent, not even in the rabbinic period, in the pre-rabbinic period. Okay? And then Vahu Uvda the Perak Ein Darshin, Dehavianu Lazarus Nashim, V'samcho Lav Nashim, another story where actually with the rabbis were involved, that women did smicha on a korban, and so on. So Tosfos says, no, we paskin that it's allowed. It's interesting, although Rambam paskins, for example, that women do not do smicha, like Rabbi Yehuda are not allowed to do smicha. Rambam says, like, if a woman wants to put on tzitzit, she can put it on and make a bracha, because it's a mitzvah, it's in a mitzvah Yosef. So the first thing so somehow he splits his vote, Rambam. But the first thing that's established is that we paskin like Rabbi Yossi, that if a woman wants to, they can. But then the next question is, and that presumably overrides these secondary rabbinic concerns. But then the remainder of this Tosfos is devoted to the critical question of not just saying whether a woman does it and we can ignore those secondary concerns, but you know what the remaining question is? Is a woman going to make a bracha when she makes a mitzvah saseh shazman brahma? And Tosfos basically tries to make a strong argument, although he goes back and forth whether he can actually legitimately make that argument, that whether women make a bracha or not, if they're not obligated. And Ashkenazi practices women do make a bracha, Sephardi practices women do not. Now, why do women break a bracha? How could they say v'tzivanu if they're not mitzuveh? This again gets to the question of what is the relationship to mitzvah saseh shazman brahma. So one answer is v'tzivanu means Klal Yisrael. We personally, as women, weren't commanded, but we, the Jewish people, were commanded. Okay, and that's what it means. And again, somewhat says that women are really a little bit, excluded. But Enochanami, the bracha is still somehow relevant as part of Klal Yisrael. But there's another approach in the Rishonim that says, like I was saying before, that the exemption is not exclusion. So women also were commanded. They can exempt themselves, right? They have an exemption, but the exemption only comes after the fact that they are commanded. And if they waive the exemption, then they once again, get into that category of being commanded. They're not at the same level as men. They can't be motzi men again because they do have the exemption, but actually they are seen as fundamentally commanded as well, fundamentally commanded with an exemption. So this raises these really important questions about women's obligation. And when they do a mitzvah saseh shazman brahma, how much are they considered to be doing a mitzvah, getting schar for a mitzvah, even at some level mitzuveh in it, that they could say the bracha, that it overrides other concerns, or how much not. And that's really like a major, major issue. And I should say that for Sephardim, although Rambam paskins, women can blow the shofar and can put on tzitzit and can do whatever, the Rambam says, I might have missaid it before, I think I missaid it before. The Rambam says you don't make a bracha. I think I said what I didn't mean. I misspoke. I'm sorry, I misspoke. The Rambam says women do not make a bracha on this because they're not mitzuveh. In Sephardi communities, I've noticed that women seem, and I think I've said this before, feel much less motivated to do some of these mitzvot saseh shazman brahma. And I think it's since they're not making a bracha, the clear message, the strong, message which is not verbalized is this isn't really a mitzvah. I mean, I still remember I was once in a Sephardi home for Sukkot, and I woke up in the morning and I took the lulav and asked her. I came home from shul, and then I said to the abalas abayis, I said, do you want to, and I just mentioned, look, do you want to take a look? She says, no, why would I want to do that? And I was so shocked, it's like completely not relevant to me. Now, I think even that being said, when it comes to shofar and Rosh Hashanah, women really, see themselves as being mechuyavot, and I think someone would be shocked to hear that they're not actually technically chayavot. But nevertheless, the making of the bracha sends a very powerful message. So it is important that, number one, how we paskin like Rabbi Yossi, according to Tosfos, and even the Rambam doesn't paskin by Rabbi Yossi by korbanot, paskins him by other mitzvot. And number two, so the other secondary concerns are waived. And number two, but by saying women actually make a bracha, it's really sending a strong message that it's not just, we let you do this if you want to, because it makes you feel nice, but it really makes a strong point about this really being a mitzvah for you as well. Okay, so that's very central, very important issues in our current religious life emerge from this Gemara. Yeah. So Kiddush is different because Kiddush is connected Zachor to Shamor. So there are obviously some time-bound mitzvahs, or matzah, because matzah is connected to the Isra of eating chametz. So there are exceptions to that rule. So right? Yes, exactly. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Asking now back to the issue of tinokos, about kids, letting them blow the shofar and fool around with the shofar. So the first thing said, you don't stop them, but the next thing said, you actually actively involve yourselves in having them blow the shofar. Okay, now again, the issue might be on a normal yontav, a question of making music on yontav when it's not in the context of a mitzvah. Okay, so we just got through saying whether women can do it, but how about kids? They're not doing, for them it's not a mitzvah. Can they go ahead and be blowing these musical instruments? So Amar Rabbi Eliezer afilu b'Shabbos, and not only, and this is the real shocker, not only on Yontav, where for other people it is a mitzvah, but you even let them do this on Shabbos, where it's nobody's doing the mitzvah today. Tanya Namihari, we taught similarly, mitazkin ben ad sheyilamdu afilu b'Shabbos. So again, both statements, you can actively involve yourself and you don't interfere. And even on Shabbos, which is a real shocker, because it's one thing to say, on Yom Tov, for everybody else it's a mitzvah, you can do it too. But on Shabbos, nobody's doing it, and we're going to let the kids do it. So now the Gemara says, Hagufa kasha, and also it's internally contradictory. Amarta asking about first you say you actively involve yourself. You see, lechatchila, we tell them to blow. We actually actively involve ourselves. The harder ton, and then it says, Ein ma'akvin, you don't interfere. Ikulahu delo ma'akvin. We interfere, we don't do. Had lechatchila lo, but lechatchila, we don't try to encourage them to blow. So lo minatiku. So Gemara says, lo kasha, it's not difficult. Kan bekatan she'igia lechinuch, kan bekatan shelo igia lechinuch. Is the katan at the age of chinuch or not? Now, which way does this go? So first I'll give you the easier answer. The easier answer is, before the age of chinuch, then, it's not really, we can actually actively, even though it's Shabbos, and obviously nobody should be blowing the shofar on Shabbos, we can actually encourage them to blow because, it's pre-chinuch, so there's not a concern of Shabbos violation of rabbinic types of things. Once they're the chinuch age, then we don't interfere. Maybe normally as a parent, your kid picks up muktzah, you'll interfere. Mm-hmm. But today, even though it's Shabbos, it's also Rosh Hashanah. So you don't interfere because, Nishka Fairlach, that they're blowing a shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and there's a good idea there too, that they're connecting to the idea of shofar, but, and you won't interfere even though it's also Shabbat, but you won't actively do it if they're, because it is Shabbat. Okay, so that's one explanation. The other explanation goes the opposite way. The opposite way is, no, for somebody pre-chinuch, we won't interfere, but we won't be involved in it. Somebody at the age of chinuch, there's the chinuch of Shabbos, but there's also the chinuch of Rosh Hashanah. So maybe we'll even encourage them to blow. Maybe we feel a little deprived. We're not hearing the shofar and shul in Rosh Hashanah, so we'll try to encourage our kids, to blow the shofar. Now that is a little bizarre because, again, how can we encourage them to do it if it is Shabbos? But Tosfos nevertheless says maybe, yes, it's Shabbos, but it's also Rosh Hashanah, and maybe that gives us a certain amount of latitude. I will say that in the Shulchan Aruch, you do not, and there's a whole question here that I didn't get into. Some actually have the girsa of a lo b'Shabbat, not a filu b'Shabbat. So in Shulchan Aruch, you do not have the girsa of, you do not have the psak that gives any latitude on Shabbat. What you do have is the psak that gives latitude on a normal yontiv for kids to blow. And the Ramah actually paskins, if it's not Shabbat, then the Ramah paskins clearly, it makes more sense to be actively involved with kids that are higia l'chinuch. Here's a day that everybody's in the shul, hearing the shofar, even if the kid didn't make it to the shul, you can actively involve, you can blow the shofar, encourage him to blow the shofar, you can blow the shofar for him, you can do these things. Look, a few days ago we learned that you can make a bracha even when you're normally not entitled for the sake of chinuch. So here, once he's higil chinuch and it's not Shabbos, it's just yontiv, you can actively be blowing the shofar. Lo higil chinuch, not. And this raises an important question. Is the shofar, now it's not muktzah because you can always use it for somebody who hasn't yet heard the tkiyot, but are you allowed to blow the shofar for fun on Rosh Hashanah after you've heard the tkiyot and shul? Does the general prohibition of making music on Yom Tov revert after you've done the mitzvah? Or is it only overridden during the doing of the mitzvah, or anything that's part of the minhag, the 100 kolot, anything that's, for the sake of the mitzvah? But as soon as I'm just fooling around, I got a shofar, it's Rosh Hashanah, toot, I'm having fun, maybe that's usher because it's making, music on Yom Tov. So the Lamed is included in this idea of mitaskim and legitimate. So the Ramah basically rules that is correct, it is forbidden. You cannot just fool around and blow your shofar for fun on Rosh Hashanah. The Taz argues, the Taz says on Rosh Hashanah, the shofar cannot be considered problematic in any way. Any type of blowing is okay. But the Ramah rules it is problematic, and therefore the Ramah rules that's the chiddush of what we're saying here. Forget the Shabbos aspect, which complicates it. But at least what we're saying is that if you're not doing a mitzvah, then you can't be blowing a shofar. However, if you are doing it for kids that are the age of chinuch, and it's about chinuch, and it's about, creating, even if it's not technically teaching how to do ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, but, just creating a shofar experience on Rosh Hashanah, then that's legitimate. Okay, so that raises that interesting question of, is there some general problem of blowing the shofar when it's not in a mitzvah or in a chinuch context?
the adult is going to have to blow in order to teach the child.
What?
The adult's going to have to show the
Right, so that's the point. So that would be okay. That would be okay. Right. So according to that read that we're not talking about Shabbos, we're just talking about Yontiv, then asking behem could even mean that you could blow it if it's all in the process of chinuch. Right. If you're just you weren't trying to do the mitzvah, you were just trying to teach the kids, or you were trying to, fool around, and then you're not yotzei because you didn't have intent. The Gemara says, Hatokei l'shir, this would seem to suggest that it's only because you're mitasek. Mitasek means like it's completely incidental. But if you're trying to make the right sounds, but with a different intent, like you're doing it for music, yatsa, it sounds like you would. Mitasek is like completely incidental. Only that, not yatsa. Let's say this supports Rava. The Amar Rava Hatokei l'shir yatsa. If you're doing it intentionally, even if you're not doing it for the sake of the mitzvah, like you're doing it for music, you are yotzei. The Gemara says, no. You don't know how big the category of mitasek is. Mitasek could mean anytime you're not doing it for the mitzvah, we're calling it mitasek. So you don't exactly know where to draw the line there. Mitasek might mean if it's not being done for the mitzvah, you're not yotzei. If you heard it from somebody who's mitasek, you're not yotzei. Aval, says the Gemara, this gets to another question of kavanah. Not kavanah to do the mitzvah, but kavanah to be motzi somebody. Because this seems to indicate that the only problem is that the guy wasn't intending to do the mitzvah, and you heard his tekiah. But if he was intending to do the mitzvah for himself, the implication is you would be yotzei, even though he wasn't intending to be motzi you. So let's say this is a contradiction to Rabbi Zera. The Amarle Rabbi Zera l'shamei, Rabbi Zera told his attendant, Ikavinu tkali, have kavanah to blow for me. It's not enough to have kavanah to blow, you have to do it for me, to be motzi me. And that's not said in the Mishnah. So Gemara says, no, since we talked about you blowing and you being mitasek, we talked about somebody else hearing it and you being mitasek, but it's actually, if somebody actually wants to hear and be yotzei, it's not enough that you have kavanah to do the mitzvah, it could very well be you need kavanah to be motzi him. Okay, so a really packed Mishnah there with these issues about what's the nature of blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah after you've done the mitzvah? What's the whole issue with women and their relationship to shofar and mitzvah saseh shezman grama, and Tosfos' whole idea there also about the brachot. So a lot there. Now we turn to the actual act of blowing the shofar. Let's take a look. Say the tkiyot, the way you do the tkiyot on Rosh Hashanah. Shalosh. 3 sets, Malchus, Zichronis, and Shofar, so whatever, and each set is made up of 3 sounds, Tkiya, Trua, Tkiya. So why we do, right, Tkiya, Trua, Tkiya, Shram, Tkiya, whatever we'll talk about, but biblically, Shofar is 9 kolos. Okay, Tkiya, Trua, Tkiya 3 times. That's what it is. Okay, we're going to learn from a pasuk. I'll just tell you. It says Trua 3 times. Yom Trua Yelachem Zichron Trua, twice by Rosh Hashanah, 1 by Yovel. Vavarta Shofar Trua. So that we learn 3 Truas. And we're going to learn from other psukim that Tkiya always comes before and after a Trua. So that's where we're going to get that the biblical Shofar is an entire 9 kolot. Okay, we have 3 Truot, Trua, 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 and that comes from the idea of Yom, Trua, Zichron, Trua, which is all by Rosh Hashanah, and Varta, Shofar, Trua, which is by Yovel. Okay, that gives us 3 Truot, and then we're going to learn from another source that anytime you have a Trua, it comes with a Tkiya before and after. Okay, so therefore that is going to get us biblically 9 kolot. Okay, so 3 sets of 3 each. Okay, now shir tki'ah k'shalosh truot. The length of a trua is the length of 3 truot. Now it's very obviously there's a big total, so it's very complicated exactly what it's saying. I'll give you like one of the standard explanations. Standard explanation is that not only is the length of a tki'ah like 3 truot, but that 3 truot is the sound of the tru'ah. So that's a tki'ah, and the sound of a tru'ah is da-da-da. Okay, da-da-da. So that is a tru'ah, and they're the same length. So it's unbroken tki'ah is the sound of 3 tru'ot, which make up the entire sound of that the truah is supposed to be.
So we're saying in quantity and quality, a truah is a fragmented tekiah.
Right. Now, again, the text isn't clear. Our assumption is the only difference between a true and a tekiah is how long the sound goes. There is a position of the Ramban that maybe it's actually a different sound. Like one is a straight sound, the other is a whoop, whoop, whoop type of a sound. So there's actually is some questions, but we assume that the only difference is how long it is. So a tekiah equals 3 truot, which again, we're going to assume that also means that to make a truah, you have to make 3 truot. Okay? Shir truah kishalosh yibavot. And a truah, each individual sound here is 3 beats. A yibavah is considered to be a beat. Okay? So what is the minimum size of a truah? Of a it's the size of whatever 3 beats is. Okay? So you can figure out, I don't know how much that is, but 3 tiny little sounds. So, okay? So that's the thing, but again, the presumption is you're making 1 solid sound and 3 sounds a third long, and each of these sounds is the length of 3 beats. Now here's stuff we've seen before. If you made the 1 tekiah and the first tekiah of this set, and then for the second tekiah, because each of these get a tekiah before and after, and the second tekiah here, you did long enough that it's the double length, right? Because this means a tekiah is 9 beats according to this. And you did a tekiah that was 18 beats. So let it count as the end of this tekiah and the beginning of that one. So no. It only counts as 1, and we've seen that before. Okay, you can't break up a tekiah in the middle. Somebody made the brachot, and then he got the shofar. He didn't have the shofar when he was doing the brachot. Which brachot are we talking about? Not the bracha of lishmo kol shofar, because then you wouldn't have made it without the shofar. What brachos did you do without the shofar? What, the
brachot of Malchiot
Zichronot v'Shofarot, which means that, and this is key, again, according to the Mishnah, everything we've seen, where does shofar occur? During Shmona Esrei, during Malchiot Zichronot v'Shofarot. Eno tokea lama hu mazkir, right? And the Baal Musaf says it, and it occurs during Shmona Esrei. Those were considered to be the brachot of the shofar, giving the whole context, sort of framing the shofar with Malchiot Zichronot and Shofarot. In the Gemara, and you do not have a bracha of Asher Kitshanu Mitzvah Tzivanu. That developed afterwards when we also developed the minhag of doing a series of tekiyot before Shmona Esrei. So if you're not doing it in the context of Shmona Esrei, you're just doing straight tekiyot, well, we need a bracha. Let's come up with a birchas HaMitzvah, Asher Kitshanu Mitzvah Tzivanu. And then came the whole question, is the girsa Lishmo Kol Shofar or Litko, or Al Tekiyat Shofar? What is exactly the mitzvah? But anyway, that developed once the shofarot themselves were stripped out of the Shemona Esrei, not removed from it. You had the shofarot without the enveloping brachot. They exist prior. What bracha are we going to make? But that's not the context of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is it's incorporated in the brachot of the Shemona Esrei. So therefore, the Mishnah asks a question: when you came to be musaf, you didn't have a shofar, so you went ahead, you davened musaf. So now you bireich va'achar nitman elo shofar. Now you've got a shofar. What do? Maybe I shouldn't do the tekiyos at all. Maybe I only do it during Shmona Esrei. So it says, let's just read it. So it says, so you went ahead, you daven Shmona Esrei without the shofar. Normally they always come together. So what do? Tokei u'miriya v'tokei shalosh pamim. So if you have to, you'll do the shofar naked from the Shemona Esrei. You'll do it without the brachot. Notice, by the way, it doesn't say now make a bracha of Lishmo Kol Shofar. Okay, again, the Mishnah only knows of the brachas of Shemona Esrei. So if something happened and you didn't have the shofar and you daven Shemona Esrei, so first of all, you're yotzei Shemona Esrei without the shofar, and b'diavad you're yotzei shofar without the Shemona Esrei. Go ahead and do the shofar by itself. The same way the shliach tzibur is obligated, every individual is obligated. Does that mean in Shemona Esrei? Maybe in the pshat it might also mean in the shofar. If the shliach tzibur is the one that is blowing the shofar, don't confuse it to think that this is some communal obligation. No, it's a personal obligation as well. Now that already seems to be that we're not talking about the shofar. That seems to be that we're talking about the Shemona Esrei. And then it would be saying the following, because people did not have sidurim. So there's a big problem with Malchiot Zichronos and Shofars if people don't have sidurim. How the heck am I supposed to be able to know the psukim to say? Okay, so I'm supposed to memorize the Shemona Esrei. Once a year I say it. So First thing is, don't think the shliach tzibur, is the only one obligated. You've got to somehow say the Shemona Esrei yourself. I don't know how you're going to know the psukim. You got to say it yourself. And Rabbi Gamliel says, no. The shliach tzibur could be motzi me. So this becomes the challenge of saying the Musaf Shemona Esrei with the Malchus and Chronos and Shofars, and we'll see. That'll be the last sugya we'll do. We'll see how that unpacks. Okay. You wanted to say something, Dov, about?
I wanted to say
the shofar without the bracha.
Yeah, the other way. If you did not have a shofar, you went ahead and said musaf without the shofar.
Yeah.
It's a bracha levatala.
No, so that again, that's what the Mishnah is being mechadesh. That b'di'eved, you can have malchus zechonos and shofars without shofar and shofar without malchus zechonos. It's a huge chiddush in both directions because we always consider them to be intrinsically, intertwined. Okay, so let's take a look. Vatanya shir tkiya kitruah. 1 minute. We have a brayta that says not a tkiya equals 3 truot, a tkiya equals 1 truah. So it says, Amr Bayi, Tana Didan Kachashiv Tkiya Dekulu Bavi, the truest Dekulu Bavi. Our Tana is counting all of the Tkiyot and all of the Truot. The Tana Bra Kachashiv Chad Bava Vetulo. And the other Tana is counting one of the units. Now, what the heck that means, again, is unclear. Rashi seems to interpret it to mean that one is saying, a Tkiya equals, when we say Tkiya equals a Tru'ah, what we mean is 1 tkiya equals 1 tru'ah, the entire length. When we say a tkiya equals 3 tru'ot, we mean maybe 3 tkiyot equals 3 tru'ot. Like all these tkiyot equals all those tru'ahs. Or tkiya equals the 3 voices of a tru'ah. It's a very hard statement to unpack exactly what that meant. Yes?
Does it mean that the length of a tru'ah is 1/3 length of a tkiya?
Yes. So right. So you could say exactly. That's what I was trying to say, which is a tkiya equals a tru'ah means the entire sort of the 3 sets combined, the entire unit all combined, and a tkiya equals 3 tru'ot means each individual sound that's part of it. That's the easiest thing to say. It doesn't sound like that's exactly how Rashi is translating it, but that's the easiest thing to say. That it equals 3 if you count the individual sounds of a tru'ah. It equals a tru'ah if you count the entire length of the tru'ah. Okay? All right, let's just assume that that's the explanation, because this is a notoriously difficult passage. Okay? And I'll just read one more sentence, and then we'll end. Shir tru'ah ki gimel yivavot, and each tru'ah is 3 beats. Vatanya shir tru'ah ki shalosh shivarim, that a tru'ah is not 3 beats, but a tru'ah is actually 3, shivarim is like longer sounds. So, Amar Abaye b'havade pligi. Okay, you're right. This they definitely argue about. Yichsiv, Yom Tru'ah yelachem, a day of Tru'ah will be for you. So what's Tru'ah? When we talk Geminan, the Aramaic translation is Yom Yibava, Yehei Lachon, a day of wailing. So what's wailing? V'ksiv be'enei de Sisra, it says by Sisra's mother, Ba'ara chalon nishkefa v'tiyabev ein Sisra. The mother of Sisra by the window was wailing. So how do you wail? Mar savar ginuche ganach, you like moan, so that's one. Umar savar yuliyolio, you wail, like when we have the word yell, right? It's like, they've said some Sephardim can do that well, right, Dov? How you do that?
Buying fish.
So anyway, or if you want to think about crying, is it like like that? So those are 2 interpretations. So how does that map onto here? Again, it seems to be that this becomes, the longer idea becomes a shever, and the smaller idea becomes a yibava. Okay, and then again, it's confusing how it exactly translates into our assumption. But our assumption of it is that there's one approach which is 3 shivarim, and one approach which a truah is 3 yibavot, which might just mean and that's it. But the way we've translated it, it means because this starts with 3, and each one of these equals 3 smaller sounds, that the other version is 9. Okay, but again, it's not exactly clear how to fit all that in the words of the Braitot and the Mishnah. It could be, according to the Mishnah, all you have to do for Truah is right? But there are 2 interpretations of what a Truah is. Okay, in the Torah you only have Truah, but now we have 2 interpretations. Either moan is a Truah or a wail. Okay, and that is either medium-sized sound or a staccato type of sound.
There's no theological difference. It's 2 different interpretations of crying.
Right. That seems to be. Yes.